Charlie's Buddy is the 12th episode of the third season of The Golden Girls. This is directed by Terry Hughes, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And generally, I thought this was a pretty good episode. It starts off with, honestly, a rather long introduction. It was longer than it needed to be to get to the point, but Dorothy has bought a dress. We'll come back to the dress in a little bit. And then there's a knock at the door, and it's a character called Buddy Rourke, played by Milo, and he's there to see Rose. And it turns out that he was an old buddy of Charlie's during the war. And they go out together, and Charlie used to read his letters that Rose would send him, and Buddy used to imagine what Rose would like. And we have this rather beautiful quote. As far as pickup lines go, it's pretty stunning. And he says, "I spent a long time searching for somebody exactly like Rose Nylund." And then he establishes that there isn't anybody quite like Rose Nylund, which I think is pretty true. And then they kiss very briefly. And we're then back to the dress. And Dorothy comes in. The dress is absolutely stunning. She looks gorgeous. It is beautiful. And then Blanche comes out wearing the exact same dress. It is stunning. It looks great on both of them. And they're arguing back and forth. And Rose comes home. And as they're arguing about this dress, they don't immediately pick up on what Rose is saying, but she's trying to tell them that Buddy is going back to Boston and he wants her to go with him and live with him permanently. And I will say, moving in with somebody, not just moving in, but moving to Boston or anywhere, doesn't have to be just Boston, but moving to a different state with somebody you've just met, seems like a decision that a young person with not a lot of life experience would make, not somebody who's had enough time to learn that kind of thing is probably a bad idea. However, the episode is also a product of its time, and this really comes about when we have this conversation in the kitchen with Rose, Blanche, and Dorothy as well, and they're talking about this, and Sophia is kind of shocked by the fact that Rose might just move in with somebody without marrying them. And with some deliberation, Dorothy does finally say, maybe it's better to live with Buddy than to just charge full steam ahead and marry him. Blanche immediately says it's a sin, which is obviously funny because she sleeps around all of the time. And that definitely really helps to highlight that this episode is not contemporary to today, because the idea of moving in with somebody before you marry them is much, much more typical today than marrying somebody and then moving in with them. And as Dorothy points out, if I had lived with Stan before we got married, I could have spared us both some very painful times. And I definitely think that that's a really strong statement. Maybe at the time that would have been quite shocking for somebody to even suggest living with somebody of the opposite sex before marriage. But obviously today, that's commonplace. And it gives you time to work out if you're compatible. Because I imagine a lot of people would get married and then move in and realise actually when you live together, it's a very different kind of relationship and things can become strained and uncomfortable very quickly. So that scene was really fascinating to watch today. And I'm really glad that we had Dorothy's voice here. Because had it just been everybody saying, no, don't move in with him, you're not married, that's wrong, it's not acceptable, it would have been more difficult to watch because those attitudes are very dated. But having Dorothy saying, actually, maybe there are some benefits to this, I thought worked really well. If you watched this episode on broadcast or around about the time when it first came out, I'd love to know how that attitude was met, because I imagine there would be a lot of viewers, at least some viewers, listening to Dorothy and completely disagreeing with her, which is absolutely fine if it's a product of the time, but I'd be very keen to know what that initial reception was like, if anybody can remember it. Really interesting scene, probably even more interesting watching it now than at the time. And then we have a statement that nobody initially picked up on as being a problem, and maybe it wouldn't be a problem, I don't know, but Rose said that they're going to get a house together, so it's their house, and Buddy wants Rose to give him her half of the money now so that they can buy it and it's ready to move in and things. And that made me think that something was a little bit awkward. And we establish this pretty quickly that is the case, because sometime later, Dorothy then comes in and she's got a new dress. Blanche has bought a new dress. Thankfully, after maybe a minute of suspense, probably not even a minute, we find out that they're different dresses. Thank goodness. And Dorothy was feeling uneasy about what Buddy had asked of Rose, so she'd dug into this a little bit more deeply, and she found out that actually Buddy had just retired from working for 45 years in the Army Pension Office Records Department. And that's how he found out about Charlie. He never knew Charlie personally, and Dorothy doesn't get a chance to tell Rose any of this. And, well, before we come back to Rose, it turns out Sophia bought the same dress as Blanche, which I love. I would have liked to have seen them both wearing it at the same time. We didn't get to see that, but I still enjoyed it. And then Rose is talking with Buddy, and she gives him Charlie's gold watch. And to Buddy's credit, it is difficult to give him credit for anything, but to his credit, he didn't take the watch. He didn't take her money. They went their separate ways. And we have an interesting discussion between Dorothy and Sophia, because Dorothy is feeling guilty that she didn't tell Rose what she had found out about Buddy. And Sophia suggests, after telling another Sophia story, that if the little lie had given Rose pleasure and it didn't hurt anybody, why take that away from her? And no harm was done, so just let her have it. And I think that's an interesting point. Lies in general are bad, but at the same time, if it brings her comfort, if it made her feel closer to, Charlie and his friends during the war and the people he connected with when he was at war, maybe it's not a bad thing, because ultimately no damage was done. Buddy felt guilty. He decided to end things the way they were going. And again, it's hard to give Buddy credit because all of these problems are because of him in the first place. But he definitely ended up doing the right things. And we end with Rose saying goodnight to Charlie. And I feel like by bringing Buddy into her life, however briefly, it did make her feel closer to Charlie again, because she thought that she was finding out a little bit about his past that she wasn't aware of. It's deceitful. One could argue that actually that kind of deceit isn't acceptable and Rose should know the truth. But I can also see the argument that if it brings her comfort and happiness and there is no harm done, then let her have it. I don't think there's a kind of black and white answer to that. Yes, it's a good thing. No, it's a bad thing. If you have any strong opinions on that, I'd love to know. Personally, I can see the argument for both sides. And it was a really heartwarming way to end things. It's a good episode. I think everything developed really well. Everything flowed really well. Personal highlights, I think, would be... It would have to be Dorothy and Blanche wearing the same dress, particularly because they continued to wear it for a decent amount of time. It wasn't just a quick reveal. I thought, how long they wore it for was pretty effective. And I think Sophia's talk with Dorothy was sweet as well. And also the conversation in the kitchen about whether it's acceptable to live with a man before you marry him, because it was just really fascinating to listen to today. I have no complaints. It's a really, really good episode. Charlie's Buddy is definitely a decent episode of The Golden Girls.